The good years. Imagine you had everything you wanted, a nice house, a good car, plenty of food, etc. Then, over a short amount of time, everything was gone. And this did not just happen to you, it happened to everyone you knew. It was even worse for those who did not start off with much. Well, that is what happened during the Great Depression. First in America and then around the world, people fell into a financial panic. So, how did it all begin? Getting rich quick. It is natural for people to want more than what they have. They want to make their lives better or their children's lives better. In America, before the Great Depression, this was certainly true. Traditionally, the safe way to save money is to put it in a savings account in a bank. Over time, you will earn a small amount of interest on that money. But this is slow. It takes a very long time to make money this way. A quicker way to make money is to invest in shares. Basically, shares are pieces or percentages of a company. If the company you invest in does well, then you profit. This is a much faster way to make money, but it can be dangerous. If the company you invest in does not do well, then you lose money. The Big Gamble. Before the Great Depression, many people were investing in shares. They felt confident because the stock market was doing well. In general, people's shares were increasing in value. People began to expect the market to continue to rise. Some people spent money they did not actually have yet. Some even borrowed money from banks based on future stock market income. The trouble is that a share is not worth the set amount. It is only worth as much or as little as someone is willing to pay for it. Buying shares is risky. You take a chance that the value will go up, not down. This is what we call speculating on the stock exchange, the place where shares are traded. From 1920 to 1929, stocks continued to increase in value. Many banks even invested the money they held in the stock market. But then, on one day, everything changed. The Wall Street Crash. The Wall Street crash was named after the street where the U.S. Stock Exchange was located, Wall Street. This event was also called Black Tuesday. On October 29, 1929, stock prices collapsed. Panic set in. Suddenly, everyone wanted to sell their shares and get their money back. As everyone wanted to sell and no one was buying, the value of shares kept falling until eventually they were worthless. People lost all the money they invested. Those who had borrowed money to buy shares suddenly found themselves heavily in debt. Because of the crash, people did not want to spend money. They wanted to save the money they had left. No one wanted to buy the products that factories were producing. Industry slowed down, and businesses began to lay off workers. Millions of people became unemployed. Wages dropped because there was so much competition for work. Less money meant less production, and so it continued. Could it get worse? The banking crisis. Yes, it could. The banks themselves were in trouble. As people lost confidence in the financial system, they began to worry about the strength of their banks. There was a rush to withdraw money. The banks didn't have enough cash to give people. Often, the banks could not pay back the loans they had made to other banks. Many banks could not cope with the demands. Thousands of banks failed. Many people who had purchased things on credit had debts. Without work, people could not pay back the money they owed. Many of the people who had taken out home loans lost their homes as well. The gold standard. The situation in the United States did not happen in isolation. Many financial centers around the world were linked together by a system called the gold standard. Each participating country's money system was based on a basic unit of currency that was worth a set amount of gold. When the system in the United States failed, the other countries in the system began to have problems as well. The crisis had a particularly devastating effect in Europe, where many countries were still recovering from World War I. The story in the United States. The Depression changed people's lives. By 1932, millions of Americans were unemployed. Most of those who were lucky enough to have jobs no longer had full-time jobs. Middle-class and working-class people were devastated. People could not earn enough money to feed their families. Many schools closed. The death rate rose. Children and teenagers tried to get jobs to help their families. During the Depression, everyone had to adjust to a new way of life. What did the government do? In the United States, President Hoover believed that it was not the government's job to give help to the unemployed. People became angry with him, and in 1932 they elected Franklin D. Roosevelt in his place. Roosevelt promised a new deal for the American people: relief, recovery, and reform. He made laws to help stabilize industry, create jobs, and encourage recovery. He also introduced the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, which helped the banks. The Great Depression in the UK. The Great Depression hit the UK very hard too. Things were worst in the North, where people mostly relied on jobs in the coal, steel, and shipbuilding industries. The UK had still not recovered from the effects of World War I, and it was unable to compete against industries from other countries. Businesses failed, resulting in massive unemployment. The government was unable to deal with the situation. Many unemployed people marched for hundreds of miles to London to demand help. This was called the Jarrow Crusade because the people were from the town of Jarrow. However, these people were told to go home and figure things out themselves. The British economy was linked to their many colonies around the world, and this spread the Depression even further throughout the world. The story in Germany. Possibly most significant of all was what happened in Germany. The Germans already had to make compensation payments after World War I. Germany was also in debt to the United States from loans made to them in order to help rebuild the German economy. Now the Germans had to make payments just when the price of goods was rising. Plus, the value of money was decreasing at a rate that was out of control. There was a massive increase in unemployment throughout Germany. The people became very dissatisfied with their government. Ultimately, this led to Adolf Hitler's rise to power. World War II and the end of the Depression. On September 1, 1939, Germany, under Hitler, invaded Poland. Britain and France had promised Poland they would help if such an event took place. Britain declared war on Germany the day after the invasion, and so World War II began. By 1945, when the war ended, the Great Depression had also finally gone. The war itself did not end the Depression, but several factors connected to it did. The war created a demand for industries to produce goods like planes and weapons, and government spending increased. Unemployment was no longer a problem because everyone was involved in working together in the war effort. Could it ever happen again? Although the Wall Street crash set events in motion, it was itself a symptom of what was already wrong with the financial situation at that time. Today, countries no longer use the gold standard. Nowadays, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, founded in 1944, works to stabilize currency exchange, and the World Bank works to reduce poverty around the world. Since the end of World War II, there have been 4 major recessions in 1975, 1982, 1991, and 2009, but none of them have developed into long-term depressions. Perhaps we have learned our lesson, perhaps not. Only time will tell.